Watch right now in the Front News Project unique footage of the hellish battle for Putin's army. The Ukrainian armed forces destroyed enemy tanks and eliminated Russian soldiers. Fake truce. The Kremlin maniac starts raids in Moscow. And also Pokrovsk on May 9th. What is the Kremlin planning on the eve of the parade on Red Square? Watch fiery, hot, and blazing footage from the front line right now. The fourth year of the full-scale war. A war that Vladimir Putin and his entourage unleashed on Ukrainian soil. The heroic resistance of the Ukrainian armed forces and the entire Ukrainian people in the fight for their freedom continues. Greetings. This is Front News. This is Vladimir Timoshenko with you. In the next 30 minutes, you will find the truth about the war, which our journalists gather from the hottest combat zones. So, are you ready? Then, let's begin. And we start right away with the most important thing, the 30-hour truce from Putin, which the Kremlin maniac so pompously announced. And what? Russia predictably violated it repeatedly. As they say, nothing new. Right now, we will tell and show you how this so-called truce went, and the real meanings and goals of this maneuver by the Russian dictator. Let's watch.
30 hours instead of 30 days. Such a short-term truce, calling it an Easter truce, was announced by the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin.
I order all military actions to be stopped during this period. We assume that the Ukrainian side will follow our example.
And once again, the master of the Kremlin did not keep his word. The Russian army violated the ceasefire regime dozens of times. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, called the Easter truce by the Russian dictator an attempt to play with lives.
The total number of violations by the Russian army of its own promise of silence in these 24 hours is 2,935. More shelling and assault actions in the Pokrovsky direction. The Russian promise of complete silence also did not apply in the Kursk direction. In total, across the front, there were 96 Russian assault actions, 1,882 shellings of our positions, including 812 from heavy weaponry. Russian FPV drones were used more than 950 times. On this day, Moscow did not have enough to respond, either to the proposal for a complete ceasefire for the next 30 days after Easter, or to the proposal to at least maintain silence in the sky regarding civilian infrastructure, and refrain from missile and drone strikes.
In areas where active combat was not taking place, the Russian army used this time to clear roads of previously damaged equipment and to set up crossings over water obstacles in order to conduct future assault operations. Although the Easter truce was only verbal, many analysts interpret it as the Kremlin's desire to continue negotiations with Washington. Last Thursday in Paris, the American administration handed over confidential documents regarding a ceasefire to Ukrainian and European officials. The details of the document became known from an article in the Wall Street Journal. The plan allows for the recognition of Crimea as Russian, the transfer of control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to the United States, and a ceasefire along the line of contact.
This week, Ukraine is under pressure to respond to a series of far-reaching ideas from the Trump administration on how to end the war in Ukraine by making concessions to Russia, including the possible U.S. recognition of Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and excluding Kyiv from NATO.
The key idea of the agreement to recognize Crimea as Russian was leaked to the press as early as Saturday. This was reported by Bloomberg.
The potential concession is the latest signal that President Donald Trump is eager to secure a ceasefire agreement, and it came after he and Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated on Friday that the administration is ready to abandon its efforts to mediate peace if progress is not achieved quickly.
A final decision on this matter has not yet been made, and the U.S. proposal is just an idea that Kyiv needs to evaluate, not the only option. The proposal to transfer the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to the U.S. and establish a ceasefire along the front line is unlikely to satisfy Moscow, as the Kremlin, without fully capturing them, has incorporated 4 regions of Ukraine into its constitution. But the 47th president is very optimistic about the future peace agreement.
I hope Russia and Ukraine will strike a deal this week. Both countries will then start doing big business with a thriving US and make a fortune.
Initially, Kyiv must provide a response at the meeting of European, American and Ukrainian representatives in London at the end of this week. If an agreement is reached, the proposal will be forwarded to Moscow. However, considering how the Kremlin did not adhere to the announced Easter truce, the chance of signing a peace agreement is currently slim.
And also in the Kremlin, preparations are underway for the victory frenzy scheduled for May 9th, marking the 80th anniversary of the end of that war. Putin will try to sell Russians his pseudo-great victories in the war against Ukraine. According to experts, the main bet the bunker dweller has made is on the capture of Pokrovsk. We have found out on which fronts there might be a surge of hyperactivity by the occupiers in the run-up to May 9th. We present to your attention our next report.
Bloody gifts for Putin. By May 9th, Russia might attempt to capture a few more kilometers of Ukrainian land. And here it's not about tactics, but symbolism. The Kremlin needs visuals and catchy headlines. And who cares if hundreds or even thousands of Russian soldiers fall?
After all, we are all mortal, right?
A theatrical offensive might begin southwest of Pokrovsk towards the Dnipropetrovsk region. There, only about 4 kilometers remain from the Russian positions to the border. According to Austrian Colonel Markus Reisner, this direction could become a point of pressure in the coming days.
For the average citizen, including Russians, the real picture of the front is unclear. But if they read in the newspaper that Russian troops are already in the Dnipropetrovsk region, it will have an informational impact.
Amid this information war, Russia creates the illusion of pressure along the entire front line while maintaining strategic initiative. The Ukrainian armed forces are forced to respond to enemy attacks. This, says Reisner, is a strategic trap that works. The occupiers rely on numbers and are certainly not fighting alone. Shells from North Korea, drones and technology from Tehran, resources from China and India.
North Korea, a country we consider to be ruled by a madman, has already supplied 3 million artillery shells twice in a row, last year and the year before. The Russians produced between 2.5 to 3 million artillery shells during the same period, totaling 12 million artillery shells. What have we done during this time? We supplied the Ukrainians with 1.6 million last year and 1.3 million the year before.
I wouldn't tie it to dates that are sacred even for the Russians. This is a mistaken opinion. The fact is that the Russian offensive has not stopped. Therefore, when statements are made about a possible Russian offensive on certain sections of the front, this information does not correspond to reality. The statements of the Austrian colonel are controversial, and I will explain why. The strategic task of the Russian troops is to reach the administrative borders of the Donetsk region. That is, the Dnipropetrovsk direction is not a priority.
Putin continues to fantasize. Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions are still within the imaginary borders of Russia. He included them in the Russian Federation back in 2022. And it seems that the Russian dictator does not want to deviate from this plan. This is also confirmed by the latest statement from Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, that a ceasefire is impossible at this stage. Currently, Russia is amassing its troops at the border with Ukraine, most actively in the Donetsk direction.
At the moment, operational reserves are being transferred to the Donetsk direction from the Kursk direction. And I do not rule out the possibility of replenishing personnel with conscripts. I remind you, the Russian Federation is currently undergoing the so-called spring draft, which aims to replenish the personnel of the occupying country's armed forces. Approximately 160,000 personnel.
Apparently, the intensification of hostilities is related to the fact that Russia is once again recruiting a fresh batch of cannon fodder, young guys who will be sent to die for the ambitions of the Tsar. But this scenario has long been calculated by the Ukrainian command. The armed forces of Ukraine are preparing for every move of the enemy. Neither false targets nor diversionary maneuvers will confuse them. The defenders of Ukraine stand firm so that not a single centimeter of our land becomes a gift to the Kremlin's victory frenzy, neither on May 9th nor on any other day.
Well, now it's time to analyze the operational situation on the Lyman front. The enemy continues its military terror. On the Lyman front today, the invading army carried out both 7 attacks on Ukrainian positions in the areas of the settlements Novaya, Novomikhailovka, Grekovka, Mirnoye, Kolodiazy, Torske. Another clash is currently ongoing. And once again, it's a real hell on earth in the war-torn Kharkiv, Ukraine. The number of injured has risen to 120. Unfortunately, there is a casualty. Russia launched 4 missile strikes on Kharkiv on the morning of April 18th, hitting a high-rise building which led to numerous injuries. Apartment buildings and private homes have been destroyed. The strikes were carried out with ballistic missiles equipped with cluster munitions, resulting in very large areas of impact. All the details of this horror are in the report from the scene by TSN correspondent Yulia Boyko.
The morning in Kharkiv started loudly. Around 5 in the morning, residents were awakened by a series of powerful explosions. The Russians struck the city with Iskander missile systems. One of the missiles exploded in the air right next to a 16-story building in the Osnoviansky district. The blast wave shattered windows, damaged facades, and tore off balconies. The missile exploded just a few meters from the building's wall. The Russians once again targeted civilians exclusively.
I woke up, quickly grabbed the child. She didn't have time to understand anything, but she was very scared. There was a bang and such a wave, the windows shattered. I was sleeping, and then it all came crashing down. My daughter screamed, "Mom, are you alive?" But we are all alive, my daughter and granddaughter. My daughter went to the hospital. Her eye is slightly cut and the glass needs to be removed.
At the moment of impact, the city was still asleep. Monitoring Telegram channels reported the missile launch a minute before the explosion. This time was not enough to reach the shelters. People were waking up from the explosions.
I was sleeping. I saw a flash, only had time to cover myself with a blanket, and then the explosion happened. The entire apartment was destroyed, the dogs ran outside. No windows, no doors, nothing is left.
During the missile strike, a 79-year-old man was killed. The pensioner was not very mobile and didn't manage to get to the shelter. He died in his own apartment. The number of injured people kept increasing throughout the morning. Initially, reports mentioned 50, then a little later 70, and eventually it became known that there were nearly 100 injured. 19 people were hospitalized, among them at least 7 children. The most severe condition is among 3 adults.
And the 40-year-old woman had a traumatic amputation. A man was also brought in a serious condition. He was immediately taken to the operating room with a penetrating abdominal wound. Currently, both the woman and the man are in intensive care. A 3rd person was also taken to the operating room. There, the injuries are less severe.
One of the missiles, the 9M727, had a fragmentation high explosive warhead. Its fragments went through walls, exploded balconies, and damaged facades. And that's why so many people were injured. The regional police department says this missile is an analog of the American Tomahawk, capable of flying low over the ground, maneuvering and remaining almost undetectable by air defense. If it had hit a nearby building, it would have collapsed. This means that the target of the terror was specifically civilians.
Today is Good Friday. Today is Good Friday. It's not just terrible, it's not just terrorism. It's really, I can't even appreciate it. How can you even put it into words? Who are these people who commit such crimes at such a time?
2 more Iskander missiles were planned by the Russians to hit a civilian enterprise. The strike destroyed 2 workshops. In one, they were sewing women's jackets, and in the other, they were making tubes for shampoos, cases for cosmetics, and packaging. There were no military targets there.
These are civilian enterprises that supply household goods. There are 2 of them. One worker suffered a traumatic amputation of a lower limb, a very severe injury, and he was hospitalized. That is, those who were directly working at these enterprises were the ones affected.
Also, as a result of the attack, more than 20 apartment buildings, 3 dozen private houses, and an educational institution were damaged. More than 500 apartments sustained damage. Rescuers worked on site until late in the evening. Utility workers cleared debris, restored networks, and removed rubble.
Well, now we move to the much-suffering Pokrovsk direction of the front. The enemy is becoming more daring here as well. In the Pokrovsk direction, since the beginning of the day, Russian occupiers have made 22 attempts to push our soldiers from their positions in the areas of populated localities. Sukaya Balka, Mayrolubivka, Mukay, Yelizavetivka, Sukhoy Yar, Kotlina, Osoto Uspenivka, also Novo Oleksandrivka, also Troitskaya, also and Nadivka. The defense forces are holding back the onslaught and have already repelled 9 attacks. 13 clashes are still ongoing. The aviation of Russian terrorists struck with guided aerial bombs on Oleksandropol, Pokrovsk, Novopavlivka, and Muravka. It was truly a hellish battle for Putin's army. The armed forces of Ukraine repelled a massive Russian assault. The enemy lost 29 pieces of equipment and 140 personnel. Additionally, 3 tanks were damaged. In a minute, we will show you footage of this battle. Meanwhile, the revenge for the genocide in Sumy continues. The armed forces of Ukraine once again obliterated the 112th Guards Brigade of the Russian Federation. And it was these guards who launched missiles at Sumy. Footage of Ukrainian retribution. You'll see soon. Additionally, Crimea trembled once again. What's important here? The Russian Ministry of Defense claims that the peninsula was allegedly attacked by 2 aircraft-type UAVs. What is the specificity of these UAVs? Or is this just another nonsense from Russian propaganda? All the answers in our report.
This week, the armed forces of Ukraine consolidated their success and struck again at the location of the 112th Guards Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces, in Shuya. This brigade was involved in the strike on Sumy on Palm Sunday, which claimed the lives of dozens of Ukrainians. Explosions were heard and a fire broke out on the territory of the military criminals unit on Thursday night. Preliminarily, it hit a hangar where Iskander missiles are stored. By the way, the strike on Sumy is not the only crime committed by these murderers of civilians in Ukraine.
It should be noted that the 112th Guards Missile Brigade involved in other high-profile acts of international terrorism on the territory of our country. In particular, it was the missile operators of this brigade who struck the village of Groza in the Arkhansk region, resulting in the death of 59 local residents.
And as it should be, every war criminal receives a fitting retribution for their crimes. The occupiers paid the price for both Sumy and Kharkiv.
After this terrorist act, in January 2025, the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine stated that in Russia, as a result of the explosion, the battery commander of the 112th Missile Brigade, Captain Konstantin Nagaiko, was seriously injured, who, according to reports from the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, was involved in this act of international terrorism.
Ukrainian military reports that on April 16th, the Russians launched a large-scale assault on Ukrainian positions, using a significant amount of armored vehicles and personnel. In the south of Ukraine, aerial reconnaissance timely detected the enemy's movement, repelling the attack with drones and artillery. As a result of the combat actions, the enemy lost 29 pieces of equipment and 140 personnel. 3 tanks were also damaged. The occupiers in temporarily occupied Crimea are not sleeping peacefully. Recently, they were visited by aircraft-type drones, as claimed by the occupiers themselves. It was stated that the UAVs were allegedly shot down by Russian air defense forces. However, no confirmations of this were provided. The Ukrainian side did not comment on these reports, while local Telegram channels mentioned the sounds of explosions.
Aircraft-type UAVs differ from other types of drones by having a longer duration and range of flight at higher speeds. These characteristics allow aircraft-type UAVs to be used in situations where the device needs to remain airborne for an extended period to achieve the longest route. It should be noted that the Ministry of Defense of the occupying country confirmed the fact successful attacks by Ukrainian UAVs on military targets in Crimea.
Since August 2022, the sounds of explosions have been heard almost daily in Crimea. The Russian authorities explain this as shooting at Ukrainian drones, the work of air defense, or the exercises of the Russian military themselves. The self-proclaimed head of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, noted that drones are the main threat to Crimea, By the way, there is more bad news for the occupiers. Recently, the Ukrainians released a new UAV, the V1. These are light bombers designed for striking personnel, armored vehicles, as well as other military targets, both at the front line and in the enemy's rear.
And now an analysis of the operational situation on the Novopavlovsk front direction. The bloody frenzy of the enemy's army continues here as well. On the Novopavlovsk direction, Ukrainian defenders repelled 11 assault actions by enemy troops. The enemy attempted to advance in the areas of Konstantinopol, Svobodnoy Pol, Privolnoye, Novoselki, and Razliv. Another battle engagement is ongoing. Novodorovka and Daknoy were subjected to airstrikes. Guarding the Ukrainian sky, every day more than 300 enemy drones attack peaceful cities and villages in the Zaporizhzhia region alone. Most of them are successfully brought down by mobile fire groups. They work around the clock. However, they say the Russians constantly change their raid tactics to intensify their terror. TSN correspondent Kira Oves spoke with the defenders of our sky.
At the firing position, there is only a minute to prepare for battle. Over several months, these guys have destroyed more than 24 enemy targets. They say that now the Russians are increasingly resorting to massive drone attacks.
The Russians' tactics are constantly changing. They fly differently each time. That is, we always, so to speak, look ahead and consider how they will fly.
The 32-year-old fighter with the pseudonym Buta is a career military man, serving since 2011. He is the leader of the crew, identifies the target, and gives the command, fire.
Fire at the target.
Hit!
Hit! Target destroyed. After my command fired, the machine gunner starts shooting at the target. There's no stress at all. We are just doing our job. We take aim, shoot, and hit.
They destroy enemy wings using the American Browning machine gun. The equipment, the military says, is reliable.
The range is good and the accuracy is even better.
In civilian life, the military man with the pseudonym Skif is a car mechanic. In his hometown, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, he had his own car service station.
He encountered this invasion at his service station, heard the explosions, and realized that the war had reached us too.
Skif already had combat experience, having been on the front from 2011 to 2020.
In 2020, my second child was born, and I decided that the youngest should see his father more often. But things didn't turn out that way.
From the first days of the full-scale invasion, he joined the armed forces of Ukraine to protect the most valuable, his wife and 2 sons, who are eagerly waiting for their dad at home.
They help a lot with everything, from the youngest to the oldest. They study well, they are obedient, I love them very much. Family, always supportive.
In the army, I was initially a driver, and a year ago I retrained as a machine gunner. It took 1 month to move from theory to practice.
My job is to swiftly, efficiently, and effectively target and destroy after carefully, thoroughly, and precisely identifying the target.
To detect Russian drones at night, the guys use powerful flashlights and laser pointers. The mobile fire group operates around the clock.
There is no difference whether it's the Zaporizhzhia direction or the Donetsk one. I think mobile fire groups work the same way here. Arrive, detect, destroy, leave.
They admit that the responsibility is small. After all, the Russians attack Zaporizhzhia daily with hundreds of drones. And the more they shoot down, the more lives they save.
But now let's move to the Kramatorsk and Toretsk directions of the front. Russian world continues to destroy, kill, and maim here as well. In the Kramatorsk direction, the enemy tried once to advance towards Markove, but was repelled. In the Toretsk direction, the enemy is trying to break into our defenses in the areas of Toretsk, Ilinka, and Shcherbinovka. 2 attacks are ongoing. Our defenders have already repelled 5 assault actions by the invaders. And here's another very interesting story that so clearly characterizes what's happening in Putin's Russia. Mass raids on men of conscription age have begun in Moscow. They are being grabbed on the streets, in public transport, at home using falsified documents, and taken where? Naturally, well, to the war. Details follow in the report.
In Russia, there is a real hunt for conscripts. Putin urgently needs to replenish the supply of cannon fodder. For the third week now, men aged 18 to 30 are being caught across the country as part of the spring draft. The authorities are rushing to replenish the army, turning the law into a tool of pressure and citizens into expendable material. In the regions, lawyers note that recruitment is proceeding more calmly. However, in Moscow, there are more often raids, sweeps, and mass detentions. Despite unified legislation, the capital traditionally demonstrates the highest level of arbitrariness. Moreover, the authorities turn a blind eye to illnesses and ignore documents.
In Moscow, near the unified conscription point, a building for disobedient boys was constructed in the middle of the last conscription campaign. This is essentially an illegal prison where conscripts are forcibly taken and where a compulsory and blind medical examination takes place. Violence is used there for resistance and they are beaten with electric shocks. Now, another large building has been constructed there. What will be in it, we do not yet know, says Timofey Vaskin, a lawyer for the human rights project Conscription School.
Conscripts are hunted in crowded places, shopping centers, public transport stops, and the metro. In the latter, facial recognition systems are even in operation, and people in uniform are on duty at every station, making arrests there as quick as possible.
It must be understood that this is just the beginning of the conscription, and this is only the warm-up. Unlike the well-known meme, there is time for a warm-up here, 3 months, and the raids usually take on a very intense, harsh nature. By the end of the conscription period, somewhere around, I would say in this case, by mid-May, we will already have all sorts of record numbers. We will record them, we will announce them. For now, this is just the beginning, and these are still quite mild raids, but it's already a sign that they will happen. It's a sign, firstly, that they will happen. And secondly, and most importantly, actually, this is the first time we are recording such a thing. That raids began literally in the first weeks of the conscription. As a rule, there is usually some leeway, a period when everything is more or less calm. I don't know if they are slowing down in this way or something else.
The Kremlin is increasingly cutting off the oxygen. Alongside the unlawful roundups, new legislative proposals are emerging. One of them has already passed the first reading. It gives military enlistment officers the right to draft a conscript into the army within a year after the draft notice is issued. That is, the notice is today, but they will be taken into the army in 9 months.
This will, pour lui, significantly complicate life for conscripts. For example, if before you had to dodge for 1 or 2 months, now it's a year, says Timofey Vaskin, a lawyer for the human rights project Conscription School.
Although the law has not yet been passed in practice, such a procedure began to be implemented in Moscow last year. The movement of conscientious objectors shared the story of a young man who was recently detained in the subway and taken to the district police department. According to his wife, he received the draft notice last fall. And this is far from an isolated case.
The legislative framework, is changing. Well, it's basic, yes. It has become more dangerous, so, they raised the conscription age to 30 years. This means that a significantly larger number of people can end up in the army, can end up in military enlistment offices, and be caught in these raids. I'm not even talking about the fact that, yes, if we talk about the latest, there is already at least one amendment in this draft, and it is quite possible that it will not be the last, and almost certainly it will not be the last. There will be more changes made, but at least in this draft, the term, accordingly, the decision of the draft board has been extended to a year, and unified draft points will be opened everywhere. We also don't know what they will do with this unified database, the electronic database accordingly of those liable for military service, the electronic registry of those liable for military service. Suddenly it might somehow start working for them. They might conjure something up, a beat on some special drum of theirs, or moreover, let me remind you that there were serious discussions, and Putin's niece Sivileva mentioned that they would be reviewing the disease registries.
Everyone understands that they will by all means recruit the number of people they need, and conscription is one of those methods.
From April 1st to July 12th, the Kremlin wants to draft about 160,000 recruits aged 18 to 30 for mandatory service. This is the largest campaign in the last 14 years. The government, regional authorities, and draft boards have been ordered to effectively carry out the plan. And it is already following the strictest guidelines. The Russian Ministry of Defense claims the record mass conscription is supposedly not related to Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine. But the numbers suggest otherwise. According to the General Staff, since the start of the major war, the total enemy losses have amounted to 937,440 people. And this number grows every day. That's all for today. But very soon on the Front News program, there will be new unique materials from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, obtained so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.